So we talked about the legislation piece that we implemented in 1996. That was to fund dyslexia grants to the public schools. And then within that, there were a whole lot of pieces, right? We talked about assessments, we talked about screeners, we talked about dyslexia therapists. So we're going to talk a little bit more because some pieces of that is buried in some of this other legislation. So the next thing that happened in our state was parents were so frustrated because their children were not receiving the supports statewide that they needed, that they passed a piece of legislation. In the legislation is two pieces. So the next two pieces I talk about came out of this one piece of legislation that's called the Dyslexia Therapy Scholarships for Students. In that piece of legislation, there's a screening component. So just know, they're not separate pieces of legislation, they're the same that we're about to talk about, they came together. So this one is pretty unique. And before I even talk about it, I want to say this. A lot of school districts were mad when this was passed because, number one, it provides an option for you to attend another public school that's adjacent to your public school if they're providing certain criteria. So there's criteria they have to meet. Well, we know what happens when you go from one district to the other. What happens? They lose that money, right? So districts didn't like that. And then the other piece was it was going to fund these students to attend what we call special purpose non-public schools. So these special purpose non-public schools had to offer Orton-Gillingham-based instruction. It had to be provided by a licensed dyslexia therapist, and they had to do it 5 days a week. 5 days a week. So if your funds were going to leave the public school that that child was attending and follow them to one of those special purpose non-public schools, that special purpose non-public school had to be accredited, and it had to provide those things. So really, we didn't have to have any money to do it, right? Because we were reappropriating what we had already appropriated for public education. So those Mississippi public funds that every student got sitting in a classroom, they were worth $4,900. Well, that just followed them to that special purpose non-public school. So to date, we have awarded almost $5 million in scholarship funds. And so it was not money we had to have this big basket of money sitting over here to use. We just said, okay, like, here's what we know is best for kids. Here's the supports we can provide you at the state level. If you want to implement those supports at your school, that's fine, but we're going to give parents an option to attend these special purpose non-public schools so they can get the support they need. The interesting thing about this is you would think that your state superintendent would be like jumping up and down shouting and saying, oh my gosh, don't take that money, right? Right? Don't take that money from our public schools. And ours did not. You know what she said? Well, if the school districts aren't going to provide what they need, they ought to have an option to go somewhere to get what they need. So, crucial to have that support. But she didn't just say, okay, they could just leave. She said, okay, let's give the supports to the school that they need. Let's help them with the grants that we provide them. Let's offer all this PD. Let's partner with the institution of higher learning. Let's build all these supports for them so they can grow. So kids don't have to leave if they don't want to. So, if you want to be eligible to receive one of those scholarships, the legislation requires some things be in place. You had to have a diagnosis of dyslexia, and it had to be provided from a psychometrist, a psychologist, or a speech path that was ASHA certified. The legislation said, that's it, okay? You had to have acceptance and enrollment in that public school. So it wasn't just enough for a parent to say, I want my kid to go there. The school had to accept them, had to enroll, be accepted, and they had to verify that. And then they had to be previously enrolled in a public school the previous year when the ADA, the average daily attendance, was calculated. Well, that was because where were we getting the money from? The school. So really what we were doing is just reappropriating the funding. So what that required of the non-public schools, that piece of legislation, was if you were a non-public school receiving students under the statute, you had to be state accredited, you had to have that non-public, public designation. And this is my non-public school. State accredited, special purpose, licensed dyslexia therapist on staff. You had to have Orton Gillingham daily based program, and then you had to employ an administrator with dyslexia training. So if you were going to get the scholarship, those are the things that had to be in place at your special purpose non-public school. So all they had to do, the parents just completed an application. It's available on our website. And they send in that completed application, proof of enrollment and acceptance, verification of the diagnosis, and it can't say you have characteristics of dyslexia, you would benefit from dyslexia therapy. It has to say you have a diagnosis of dyslexia. And then they have to submit the tuition fee schedule and the school they'll be attending. Okay? So that's all that's on that application. That's all the legislation requires. So we have a little electronic application that they can fill out online. They send that in, and then we look at that and verify all of that information to make sure that they meet the criteria. And then we approve it or we disapprove it. If they don't have what they need, we contact them and say, you're missing this, or you don't qualify because you're wanting to go to this school and it's not an approved special purpose non-public school. We notify our Office of School Financial Services and send them a roster, and they literally just send those funds monthly for those students. So they just send that check to the special purpose non-public school. So that are the scholarships. So the first year it was implemented, I want you to look. So we only gave 32 scholarships. Okay? The next year we over doubled them. Right? 72. The next year we had 119, then 149, 165, 210, and this year we have 248. So you can see that more and more parents have said, I want the supports. And the interesting thing about it is that money that's appropriated, you see, we this year it's $4,984.97 a student. Well, that money does not pay for all the tuition. So the parents have to supplement what's left. And what we found is that they started with one cost. So this is kind of like a challenge maybe. They started with one cost. Well, when the legislation was passed and they saw that we were going to pay for part of it, what do you think our special purpose non-public schools did? They increased their tuition. And so the legislation does not speak at all to that. So it allowed them to continue. I don't think anybody's increased it in the last 3 years. It was really in the initial phase that they increased it. But these are the schools that have been approved. We have 142 districts. So 1,064 schools, and we only have 127 licensed dyslexia therapists. So that's an issue. So our public schools, even if they wanted to hire a dyslexia therapist at every school to provide that level of supports that they can get at the special purpose non-public school, we're just not there yet. You know, I, in my mind, just keep saying, we started in 1996, and as long as we're continuing to invest and grow and do, we'll get there. We will get there. So, a lot of times the public schools don't have the financial resources to hire just that dyslexia therapist. But so one of the things we say is partner with one of the colleges that is providing the master's program for the dyslexia therapist. They've got to get their hours, let them come and provide those services to the school. So we try to help the public schools come up with innovative ways to provide those supports to the students, but also maintaining integrity to what needs to be provided to ensure that those kids get what they need to be successful. So obtaining a dyslexia diagnosis is very expensive, right? I mean, it can range from anywhere from $500 to $1,500, depending on who assesses you. So those kids that go to those special purpose non-public schools that get those dollars have to have a diagnosis. So they had to have a parent that could pay for it, or they had to have a school district that administered it and diagnosed them with it. So that makes it not an option for every kid. So, and I just want to be completely transparent because these are the challenges that we work through. As legislation is provided to us, you know, we implement it, but we do see the challenges along the way. The kids that go to these schools, they are growing phenomenally, but they're getting, you know, a dyslexia therapist 5 days a week. And the whole program is built around their needs. So when they're in the classroom, they're aware that they have dyslexia, so it's a whole child support level that's provided. We only have 6 approved schools, so what does that mean? You're limited. They can only take so many kids. And then the location of the schools and the proximity to households. So somebody heard me say the governor's office called Tuesday, and they said, there's an article in Y'all Politics, and it says, Mississippi's journey to dyslexia is not for every kid. Well, it was about a parent, and they had misquoted some legislation. They didn't understand it, which was sad for them, because they were frustrated and probably didn't understand that this piece of legislation wasn't going to help them. But anyway, there are a lot of parents that drive a long way, and that was what really the article was about. That's what I took from it, access. If I live in Jackson and there's only 2 schools in the Jackson area, my next option is Hattiesburg, which is almost 2 hours away. People are getting in their cars and driving that every morning, which is sad. So that's why our superintendent is like, what can we do to support our schools? But if the schools don't rise to the occasion, that these parents have a right, you know, to get these supports provided for their child. So our schools are not required to hire dyslexia therapists or implement specific dyslexia therapy. And that's hard because we have a lot of parents that call and say, my child has dyslexia and they will not provide dyslexia therapy. Well, in Mississippi, it's a local decision. So I can decide that this is the intervention I want to provide for this child. What we do is say, and they can say this is the reading intervention. They have to provide some kind of supports, but we don't designate what that is. What we try to do is guide the parent and provide them the questions to ask the schools to ensure that they're getting what they need. And that way we say to the schools, these are the questions we're going to tell the parents to ask. And we tell them, we have a document that has them. So you need to be prepared to answer these questions. And if you're not able to answer these questions, then you may not be providing exactly what that child needs. And so we try to make sure that we can support both of the stakeholders. So remember I said the legislation had two parts, even though it's called the Dyslexia Therapy Scholarship for students. Here's the second part that's embedded in that piece of legislation, and it's the dyslexia screener. So this piece of legislation requires the administration, and I want you to know when this piece was first passed, it did not say state board approved. We just passed it and it said, requires the administration of a dyslexia screener in the spring of kindergarten and the fall of first grade. And that screener had to address specifically phonological awareness, phonemic awareness, sound symbol recognition, alphabet knowledge, decoding skills, encoding skills, and rapid naming. So they were required to assess for all of those things. They had to provide a screener. Okay, so what do you think happened? There was disparity amongst the ranks. Parents were calling and saying, did you know that nobody in that school failed that screener? And they didn't. Districts were developing their own screener. There was no integrity or fidelity to the process. We literally had dyslexia therapists calling and saying, nobody fails the screener. Nobody. Because you know what? If they failed the screener, then we said, you need to really be intervening. You need to provide supports. You need to notify parents. Oh gosh, don't dare notify parents that they failed the screener, because then they're going to think their kid has dyslexia. Even though we were saying, use the screener to guide what supports you're going to provide the kid. It's not about diagnosing them with dyslexia at this point. It's about screening for those characteristics and those skills that we know if they're weak in, they're going to be poor readers. They're not going to be able to read. As we go through, they may require comprehensive assessment at some point, but this is a screener. So after a couple of years of seeing that District A, no kids ever failed, and District B, no kids ever failed, and District C, no kids ever failed, we said, we've got to do something. So we went back in and said, we want to have a process for state board approved screeners. We want to make sure that we are looking at these screeners to make sure that they really are assessing for this criteria. Because if we're not, we're doing our kids an injustice and we're wasting their time, right? Screening. So what we did was we implemented some requirements. Every school had to adopt a local policy about screening. They had to screen all kids, just like the legislation said. But we took it a step further. What we noticed is some people were waiting really late in the fall of first grade to screen those students because they felt like maybe I'll get better results. And then some were waiting like to the end of the school to screen their kindergartners because they were like, I don't want anybody to fail. I don't want to have to notify mom. So we said, okay, that's not going to work anymore. If you're screening in first grade, you got to have it done by like October 12th. If you're screening kindergarten, you got to have it done by April 6th. Because our legislation gave us a little bit of wiggle room to add some additional requirements. So they had to have a policy. They had to adopt now a state board approved screener. So we nixed it. You can't just approve, can't just use the one you were using. Had to have all those things. Had to notify those parents. They had to accept dyslexia evaluations if they were done by those people. And y'all, we had districts that were saying, I don't think that kid really has dyslexia, so I'm not going to accept that. Well, you don't get to determine that you're not going to accept it because the state law says you have to accept it. And this was the big thing. Determine whether a student diagnosed with dyslexia qualifies under IDEA before proceeding to the development of a 504 plan. Now, they fight us tooth and nail in the districts about a 504 plan, but this law says if a student's diagnosis of dyslexia does not result in a disability determination, then in developing the written 504 plan, there shall be a presumption that the proficiency in spelling, reading, and writing are essential for the student to achieve appropriate educational progress. So that's not saying that every kid in Mississippi is going to get a 504 that has dyslexia. It's simply saying you're going to have to evaluate it. If they're not going to, if they don't qualify, if your team meets and they don't qualify for under IDEA, you need to consider there's some red flags for you to consider if the student needs a 504. So, and then here's the most important piece. If I fail that screener, I'm supposed to be developing interventions and strategies and implementing these supports for these kids. And we use the tier process. We have a statewide policy, and everybody has to have a tier model in place. So we provide intervention supports for these kids who fail that screener. So when we talk about the screening, it truly, truly was a blessing when we began to use state board approved ones. Because then we had this team of experts coming in. Again, we used our dyslexia therapist, our speech language pass, the ones that were CALT certified, and we had them evaluate these screeners to make sure that they really were doing it. And y'all, if we didn't think that they were, if they said they were screening these components and we didn't think it, we brought them in. We brought the individuals in and said, we don't really see this piece. Can you show it to us? And I'm going to show you our criteria in a minute. But again, this is kind of repetitious of what I said earlier. While the law states that interventions, strategies, and accommodations must be provided, we don't dictate what those interventions are. We don't say you have to use my reading coach. We don't say that. You look at what the needs of the kids are and look at the resources you have and then implement what's best for the child. Again, though, we have that piece of legislation and we have the master's program. So we're always talking about that instruction, those experts. Those are the best people to implement those interventions. So what we do, again, everything you do at a state level takes an eternity. We can't just say, we know this is a good one, we know this is a good one, and we know this is a good one. We have to do a request for qualifications. So we send this out and say, this is what we're looking for, these are the components that we're going to be looking for. It must be developmentally appropriate. It has to be able to be administered by a classroom teacher. We don't need any special qualifications to administer it. We want our teachers to be able to administer it because we want our teachers to be able to see the data and provide the supports needed. It has to assess those components that we talked about earlier. It has to provide a pass-fail score for each of those 6 components. So that phonological awareness, that phonemic awareness, the alphabet knowledge, encoding, decoding, all of those things, there has to be a pass-fail score. Because if I'm a teacher, I just need to know, did they pass that area? Did they fail that area? The required team, time for administration, a little narrative, instructions for the screening process, the individual components, overall score ranges, and the meaning of each of the score ranges. So when you start doing this, you start limiting the number of people that can apply, because you're really looking for ones that have evidence of screener reliability and validity. We look at who developed it. What were your qualifications to develop this assessment? Because remember, we had those districts that just had willy-nilly over here developing that screener, and everybody was passing it, so it wasn't doing them any good. So we said, what are the criteria? You have to provide the validity and reliability for the screener, and what was your place in their resume in. So, and the cost of the screener per student in school district. So here's the neat thing about it. When they send that in, if it costs $5,000 to screen 20 kids, the districts are the ones that have to pay for it, right? So we give them these and we say, this screener was approved, but it's going to cost you $10 a kid. And how many kids do you have? This screener was approved and it's free. This one is, so the first one, I don't know, I can't remember, but I think the price was about $9 and something a student. Lexercise is free online. And again, y'all, it's a screener. So we're just looking to make sure it's screening in those areas so we can offer the supports needed. And then if the kids continue, because remember, we're screening them in kindergarten and we're screening them again in first grade. So even though you were screened in kindergarten, you're going to get screened again in first grade. And then our Mississippi College Dyslexia Screener is for kindergarten, first, second, and third grades. They have a screener, which is great. This will be the first year that we will have had that screener. It's $35. And then the Mississippi Dyslexia and Therapy Association Dyslexia Screener for kindergarten that comes out of William Carey is, I think it's $35 too. It's on my next chart. So we provide a chart like this online. And the chart just basically has what the screener is, who the person that you need to contact is, how much it costs, how much time it takes to administer it, is it paper or pencil. So we give the districts everything they need to make the decision about which screener they want to choose. And we're going to continue to do this every year. So we hope that list grows. We weren't trying to procure just one screener because we want to give our districts a choice. We were trying to make sure that we had screeners that were reliable and valid. And that was the only way to do it, was to procure the screeners. So, let's see. Our challenges. Despite our statewide trainings, we still continue to have people that don't have that foundational knowledge. Parents misinterpret the dyslexia screener results. Remember I said they think it's a comprehensive assessment. When they fail, often they think my child has dyslexia. Sometimes it's dysteachia. Do y'all ever say dysteachia? Sometimes it is, unfortunately. So, we have to say, it doesn't mean that, I know, So, district interventions and supports vary greatly. So I have districts that have dyslexia therapists that travel throughout the county all day long and serve at the individual schools. That's how they best utilize their therapist. And then I have some in my poorer rural areas that don't have that type of support. They can't get a dyslexia therapist there. And so they're just providing what they have. So we just continue to talk about the benefits of having therapists, the benefits of appropriate instruction, and work on our teacher workforce training. So we try to provide extensive supports. We have literacy coaches, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We partner with our universities to provide professional development on our legislation, our laws and our requirements, and PD for dyslexia, so that they have a better basic understanding of the foundation of dyslexia and how to best support our kids with dyslexia. We also offer teacher scholarships to become dyslexia therapists. So that's another piece of legislation I'm going to talk about in a minute. And then we are continually providing statewide PD for our teachers and administrators on dyslexia. So we created an office, I say we, our state superintendent created an Office of Student Supports, because we have this legislation. We have these people that need these supports. We have teachers and administrators that need it. So Dr. Wright created an office, and that's my office, Office of Student Intervention Services. And really what we were supposed to do is coordinate that K-12 scholarship process, the dyslexia grants to the districts. We were going to do the selection of the state board approved screeners, provide technical assistance on MTSS implementation, and develop and publicize academic and behavioral resources to support all our content areas. So that's a pretty big job. That's that one I told you, like gifted, dyslexia, EL, all that, and we support everybody at the State Department. So she created that office to make sure that we could provide those supports. And so really we were always talking about response to intervention. And 2 years ago, we really moved to multi-tiered system of supports. We wanted to make sure that we had that framework of organization that was needed to ensure that all kids were being successful. So we no longer really say RTI, because RTI is a part of MTSS. Your multi-tiered system of supports is really the framework that you should be using to align all those resources, all those initiatives, all those supports, so that you can implement successful outcomes for academic and behavior for your kids. It aligns your entire system to ensure that you are looking at your data to make your decisions. It's all about data. So really, it was a huge shift for people, because they said, when we asked them what they thought MTSS was, they said, oh, it's just renaming RTI. And we were like, no, it's not. We've had to do a lot of work now in our state around that. But truly, all of our initiatives, all of our policies, they all are supported through the MTSS model. So we developed a documentation packet to help our districts walk through that. And it was really a means to collect your data, and we embedded all of our dyslexia information into that. So we created sections in here. And why this is important is because you see these policies, these legislative policies I'm talking about. We all have these requirements for screening. We have a universal screener we're required to administer in kindergarten. We have the third grade promotion act. So we needed to be able to align all of those pieces and have a documentation trail that was streamlined, because it was about 50 or 60 pages that teachers were responsible for filling out. We were like, that's too much. So we kind of streamlined it to help assist them, and we said, okay, we're going to have a section, and it's just the student profile you complete. And in that student profile, you're going to see where you can collect information about the dyslexia screener, characteristics of your kids, things like that. And then we had Tier 1, Tier 2 documentation, teacher support team. So those were sections that we had. And then we had appendices that we added to it to make sure that we were covering the other things that the students needed to have in their packet when we were making decisions about them. So in it, we said one of the things that they need, because if I'm looking into a classroom and I'm an administrator, or even if I'm a teacher, I need to know what you're coming in looking for. So we said we've got to have something that's aligned to our teacher growth rubric model, and we've got to be, and you just check the box for the trait if you're an administrator and you're going in there, but we're focused on classroom instruction, differentiated instruction, and classroom management. And all of this became recommendations for the documentation. So you had a packet, and on it you would enter information about your student, and then, of course, what am I providing for my supplemental instruction? So this should look like to you a lot like your response to intervention process, does it? A lot like that, maybe? So we had integrity checks for the intervention. Well, what we found was that a lot of people they had these kids with dyslexia, they had these kids with reading disorders, they had these struggling students, and they were implementing specific interventions, but they were not with integrity and fidelity. They were altering the way the intervention was supposed to be developed. They were altering the way the assessment was provided, like this is the way you're supposed to assess to get your data, to make decisions about this kid. Well, they were eliminating parts that they didn't think was important because they didn't understand the impact it had. So we said, we've got to have like some more integrity checks that we build in so that we know that there's consistency across the state and kids are getting, having their needs met. We gave them a simple progress monitoring tool to progress monitor with, but they didn't have to use that. If they were using an intervention that automatically, that they entered that PDM into, they could just print it out. So we used this tool, and then they met with the teacher support teams, had a document intensive intervention. So we used all of this to make sure that those kids that were being served really were being served. So when a parent called, or a school called, or a teacher that worked in a school called and said, they're really not doing this for my kid, we could say, oh, well, we have a process in place, and these are the pieces that are required to be in place. And so if we ever audited a district, we could go look for this stuff. And it wasn't a I got you kind of thing. That's not the intent of developing these pieces. It was to help them monitor their process, as well as to ensure that the kids were being served and that there was some documentation that you were looking at to determine what additional supports kids needed. So one of the things we have the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And this slide kind of stuck here just because it's part of the intervention packet. But I'm going to talk in a minute about the Literacy-Based Promotion Act that we have. But so the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, part of it required that every child have an IRP that was in kindergarten and 1st through 3rd grade if they had a substantial reading deficiency. So if your kid had a substantial reading deficiency, you are required to have this on them. And so what that said is, what am I going to do? And my next slide, let me see that. It says, it requires you to say, these are the supports I'm providing at school. This is how I diagnose that reading deficiency. These are the supports I'm providing at school. And it also has a piece that says, this is what I'm going to do, I'm providing my parents. So my parents know what they can do at home to help their kid. And it's required, like you have to sign off on it. And so I like to think about legislation this way. Like these probably weren't things we would have put in place at the state level because, we have policies and we have practices and we're there to support our administrators and our parents and our additional stakeholders in the community. But for this, in those schools that weren't doing what they needed to do, there was some accountability with this legislation. If you didn't want to lose your kids to go to a special purpose non-public school, then you're going to have to implement some specific supports. If kids were struggling in reading, you could no longer just say, not to worry about it, we keep passing them on, and then we had 5th, 6th, 7th graders that couldn't read. There was something that was implemented that said, you got to have them ready. You got to get them ready, because if you don't, they're not going to be promoted. Talk about frantic. We were frantic at the state. Parents were frantic. There were tears. There were phone calls from the governor when their best friend's kids didn't pass it. wondering if we could do anything to help. And we were like, it's the law. You passed it, like, you know, so really, but that first year that we did it, it was like, oh, sweet Jesus. So, progress monitoring, I just really put these in, and if you download the presentation, I wanted you just to kind of have an idea of how our process looked for documenting it, okay? So, we don't have a lot of money in my office. In fact, we have $0 to fund my office. That's why it's free. But we don't, and so, which is crazy because I have a whole staff, but my office budget is $0. But because we support everybody, these other offices said, okay, if you provide PD for the district's teachers and administrators, then we'll put some additional staff in your office. We'll pay for you. Special ed will pay for me to have my child find person and my person to help me with my 504 and my behavior. And then federal programs will help pay for that EL person I told you falls under me. So literacy says, oh, you're providing supports with dyslexia, so we're going to provide this. So we had to get innovative with our funding. We had to create the office because the office was not there. And then they helped me pay for my travel to my districts. And then if I need to go to external professional development growth opportunities, if it benefits, if I can tie it back to how it's going to benefit literacy or special education or EL, then they will pick up those calls. So we really had to get innovative because we needed an office that would support these initiatives. So here's my little staff. It's small but mighty, and they are never in the office. And I tell them all the time, and I have to put this plug in, because I was in Boston last week, Wednesday to Friday, and was supposed to fly back to Boston Monday and fly Wednesday from Boston to here, and then stay here till Friday. And I was like, oh, I can't do it. My little staff is on the road every day and did not blink an eye when I said, who wants to go to Boston for me? So one way for me is so that I could come here and be fresh and share with my Alabama friends. But I can't say enough about how much this office supports our state and how we really work to align all the initiatives across the office to provide those supports. Okay, here's another piece of legislation. This is separate from the other one because this is not in, this is awarded through the Institution of Higher Learning. So I don't oversee this scholarship, but if you want to go and get your master's as a dyslexia therapist, we will pay for it. They'll pay for your travel, they'll pay for your books, they'll pay for your materials to get your degree, your 2-year degree. It's a first come, first served basis, and I think they only take so many a year. But again, we're chipping away. We have something that says, we think it's important that you become licensed dyslexia therapist. And if we only pay for 14 a year, that's 14 a year. So eventually, we're going to have more therapists, right? Besides the fact that we have a lot of people that are doing it on their own. I'm looking at my friends that I was talking to in the bathroom that are getting it now from Mississippi College. So we also have a certified academic language therapist supplement. And this one, you get a $6,000 supplement for having your CALT certification. And they'll reimburse you for the exam up to, I think, $500 or something like that. So it sounds great when you first hear it, but we only have 20 people right now that are on the list. We hope that maybe over the years, if we just can increase it by 5. But it was really under the teacher shortage is where it falls under the bill. And so, but again, it's these little pieces, even though there's challenges and they're not very small, it's the little pieces that help us chip away at providing better supports for our kids. So you got to start somewhere. So Students, this is huge. This is so huge. Students with a documented diagnosis of dyslexia on file that were evaluated by a licensed psychologist, psychometrist, or speech path. Did I skip one? No, I didn't. Those are our assessments, but basically what I want you to see is I had a conversation with our state superintendent, and we were given extended time on the 3rd grade assessment because it was a high-stakes test, right? So we said, let's don't time it. It's gotta be on time. Well, having a kid that had dyslexia, watching his life unfold before me from birth all the way through a year of college, I knew how hard it was to have these timed tests in front of him. So I thought about the driver's license test. You know, you can go and take it, and it's not timed, and you can take it again if you don't pass, right? It's not a one-shot deal. And so I started picking her brain, and I said, you know, Logan, that little brown-eyed handsome man that you saw that really has my heart forever, I said, you know, he wanted to be a fireman. He went to school, he struggled, he didn't do good on the ACT, but he graduated. A lot of work. He didn't do so good, so he had to take this test to get into college, so he didn't have to take all these developmental courses that I taught at the college, and I knew he didn't need, because I knew he could speak, and I knew he could write, and I knew he didn't need to be in there with those students I was teaching. And I said, you know, Dr. Wright, he really wants to be a fireman. But you know what happened to him? He got ready to take that test, and it was timed. And he went in there, and he took that test, and I'll never forget, I was at Drago's, and we were getting ready to sit down and eat lunch, and he called, and he said, Mom, I didn't pass that test. After he'd done all this prep, he said, I'm at a 67. And I said, my heart sunk. I still want to cry. I'm tough. I said, you got this. I said, Logan, you know, what was the most difficult thing? It was timed. Everybody turned their test in, and I was still working on mine. I said, I'll tell you what, that fire chief, and I don't usually pull strings. I said, that fire chief, he lives across the street from us. And he is my friend. And you just got to suck it up. And you got to go across that street. And you have to tell him that you have dyslexia. And that you could not do that test because it was timed. A couple of weeks went by. Didn't say. He said, Mom, what am I going to do? I said, you're going to go across the street. And you're going to talk to the fire chief. And finally got his nerve up, and he went over there, and the guy said, well, Logan, I'll give you that test again. Just come in Saturday, and we won't time it. And he made a 94. I was so proud. So he goes in, and he's all excited, you know, and he's doing all the, I didn't know all the stuff firemen had to do. Like, if you gotta read, you gotta know all the codes. If you go to a spill, you gotta know what this code means, because this chemical will kill you dead in 2 seconds if you walk in to save somebody. Books this big. And I watched him study, and he didn't ask me for help. And then the phone call comes, where we live, everybody becomes an EMT. And I promise this is why this is important, because I call this Logan's rights right here. So I said, he called me, he said, Mom, do you know that they won't let me in school to get my EMT? And I said, why not? Because my ACT score was too low in reading, and they're telling me I got to take some reading tests. And I was like, well, when you had to get in college, your language score wasn't high enough, so you had to take the language thing, and you made like a 99. Can't they use that? And he was like, no, they're saying I can't. Well, my husband is the director of purchasing for Hines Community College, so I said, I'm going to call him, because surely to God, he can do something. So he informs me I can't do anything. He has to make this, he has to take this test. And he has to make a certain score in reading. Again, I knew what the test was. And I was like, OMG. That is a tough test to take. Like, that's the course I teach. And I know what a 74 looks like on it. And so he says, Mom, can you help me? I said, absolutely. I'll be at the fire station tonight to work with you. I said, when are you taking it? He said, in the morning. Y'all, my heart stopped. I taught that class. It was a whole semester long. So, honest to God, he said, I can't do it tonight because we have class. Because when you're a new fireman, you got class every night that you're there. So I call him on the way, taking my grandbaby to school. And I'm like, okay, so you really, this is what you got to think about. You got to find the main idea. You got to think about those supporting details. Are they minor or major? You got to infer. You got to look for these types. So I'm telling him all this, and I'm thinking, sweet Jesus, this is going to be bad. So, calls me, I promised 99 on the test. He was so smart. And you know what he said? It wasn't timed. The test wasn't timed, so it was okay. So, went back, was talking to our superintendent, and I was like, you know, we give everybody additional time on that third grade assessment. I said, you know, let me tell you what happened to Logan. So I told her the same thing I told y'all. And I love our superintendent. I've been through a lot of superintendents, and she is right at the top for me. And if she wasn't, I just wouldn't say anything about it. She's right at the top. I love her. And so I told her, and she was like, you know what, Robin? Why are we just giving that for those kids in third grade? Why don't we give it to everybody? And I said, oh my gosh, you mean everybody? She said, yeah, on all our state assessments that we give, why don't we just do that and tell them they can't, and nobody, it's not timed anymore. So when I called Logan and told him this, neither one of us had a dry eye. We were both crying because this is what he needed all along. It was the single most beneficial thing I could do to help a dyslexic kid was to remove that time factor. And so we passed this. It's not legislation. It was just a policy. Our state superintendent said, hey, Robin, she gathered all the deputies around the table and said, tell them what we're going to do. And they were all like looking like, because everybody had said we can't do it. And she was like, yes, we can. Now tell them what we're going to do. So that was huge in our state. And if you do state assessments, you know how huge that is. So they have to retain their diagnosis in the classroom. They have to maintain any accommodations that they have. There's a little form that they fill out just so we maintain the integrity of it. If you have that diagnosis, you can get it. And then we like to tell our parents, remember I told you about the 504 and the IDA and all that? Like, okay, so we're not in, there's a lot of controversy. Some use the discrepancy model. Some use the discrepancy and the RTI model. So it's not universal across our state, unfortunately, and we're working on that. But this is what we say. There are some red flags. There are some red flags for these kids who have dyslexia. Parents are requesting, if they have extensive suspensions or expulsions, frustration, low academic performance, if they have a chronic medical problem, student enrolls with a 504 from another state, absenteeism, you better be taking a close look at those kids. A lot of our kids who have dyslexia struggle in all these areas. They get frustrated. They start acting out. They'd rather not come. Logan, you know what? Logan was the class clown, and he was a social butterfly, and thank God he is best friends with the mayor. The mayor calls him to clean his deer for him. So he could work a room, he could work a system, thank God. But he would say, his teacher would say, he's so funny, he's the class clown. I'm like, yeah, because he doesn't want you to know he can't do that. So he'd rather be funny than you know he couldn't do what you were asking him to do. So some students qualify, that have dyslexia, qualify under IDA. Some qualify for a 504. You need to look at those red flags, you need to look at the individual kid, and you need to make that determination. And so we gave our district some guidance that just, here's what a 504 is. You're encouraged to examine your policies to make sure they align with state and federal guidelines. So this way, we can make sure that you couldn't go back and say, we said don't give them a 504. Because if they need one, they need one. If you're making accommodations in the classroom for them to be successful, and they don't qualify for IDEA, they might need a 504. So, is that a sore subject here? Do y'all give 504s? Okay, good. Because Mississippi thinks they're like the plague. Not even kidding. Okay, so, let me flip to where I'm in here because I made myself some notes. So, we had that dyslexia legislation that I told you about. But we had some other pieces that were crucial for moving us in the right direction. And that was the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And we passed that in 2013, and that was to eliminate social promotion, and just really we noticed how weak our skills were of our kindergarten through third grade students. So then in 2013, we said, we wanted to pass the Early Learning Collaborative Act. And so that was going to authorize districts and MDE to implement pre-K programs, because y'all have it going on over here. Like, we've come over and visited y'all's preschool, is it Secretary Ross and her team? Okay, and y'all's State Department of Early Childhood. Like, it's going on in Alabama. We're trying to get there in Mississippi. We don't have quite the appropriations, but you know, in 2013 we had the first investment. I think y'all invest like $25 million. We did $6 million, and now we're up to $6 million from Kellogg. But so not only we had the Literacy-Based Promotion Act that passed, then we had that Early Learning Collaborative Act that passed, and then in 2014 we said, okay, now we got to have a kindergarten readiness assessment. We got to have some universal data to see where kids are coming into kindergarten at. So we passed that statute that required that. And then in 2016, this was huge. Because remember I said you got to work on that teacher workforce? Because you're working as hard as you can, but we passed a piece of legislation that our teacher candidates had to pass and earn a pass and score on a scientifically research-based decision-making principles of reading. So the foundations of reading. So when you graduated, before you could even be teaching in a classroom, you had to pass the principles of reading, the foundations of reading exam. And so what that did is our partnership with our institution of higher learning, where they'd been working with our teachers, they said, we're going to have to start really talking about phonological awareness and phonemic awareness and decoding and encoding. So it changed their course syllabus. That was huge, because you got to attack it with the workforce, right? So then, that's just kind of our step ladder. So we deployed literacy coaches in the summer of 2013 after we passed that, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. And so they went to our lowest performing schools to help support those teachers. And then we procured letters. We procured the letters training, because what we found out is we did not have teachers that felt confident that they could go out and instruct those teachers. And I'm just going to say it, I taught first grade. And if I could have had my master's dyslexia therapy program before I taught first grade, my kids would have been stronger. I look back and think, what a better teacher I would have been. So really implementing the letters training in our state and training every K through 3 teacher in the state on letters has truly had a huge impact on the level of supports that we've been able to provide our kids. And so these are the modules we focused on in our state. challenges of learning to read, speak sounds of English, phonetics, phonology, and phoneme awareness, spellography for teachers, building vocabulary and oral language, developing fluency, teaching text comprehension, teaching phonics, word study, and alphabetic principles, and teaching beginning spelling and writing. So those are the ones that we focused on. And so what I want to show you, we deployed those literacy coaches to those low-performance schools. And then when you look at that, you'll see how we increase the level of supports each year, okay? So, procured letters, right? Well, then the Office of Special Education said, hey, we're going to help too. Okay, so remember we got the dyslexia legislation. Now we've got the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, and we're retraining our teachers. We're working with our institution of higher learning, and our Office of Special Education said, hey, we're going to provide phonics first for our special education teachers. We're going to procure it, and we're going to provide it for them. So they had a level 1 training, and they provided that for the K through 3 general ed students. And then they had the K through 5 SPED teachers. They hired some literacy coaches to go out now to support SPED. And then they work with their certified interventionists. They have, in 2018-19, they're going to work with their 6 through 8 teachers. So I guess what I want you to see is, it wasn't one thing we did in Mississippi. It was a lot of things. Like we said, we got an issue with literacy. Our kids aren't reading. So we've got these pieces of dyslexia legislation, but we got to have, everybody's got to get on board. And how can we support our teachers and our administrators through this process? So that's just about funding practices. So then we started saying, okay, so now we got to come up with some trainings. We've got these supports we're providing. Now how can we help these individual teachers by providing additional supports? So we really worked hard to partner with individuals to help us support statewide literacy trainings, working with our teachers. And then we said, you know what would be great? What if we had an Office of Professional Development that housed all of our trainings we offered? And that way when teachers wanted to go in and see, if I was a counselor and I was a K3 at a K3 school, I could type that in and it'd pull up all the trainings that I needed, that I could attend. So we decided we would put everybody's PD on this calendar. And you could access it so you could see what really was available for you. So, after we procured letters, we had all the dyslexia legislation, we deployed those literacy coaches to those support schools. This is really what made us know we were on the right track. And let me say this, the Literacy-Based Promotion Act, y'all heard me say, we were like tears, like this is about to be bad. But it forced us to make changes, and changes are hard. So our average educator knowledge increased from 48 to 59% on the teacher knowledge of early literacy skills survey after we implemented letters training. In our target literacy support schools, the average rating of quality instruction increased from 31% to 58%. Y'all, that's huge. The average rating of student engagement increased from 37% to 53%. And the average rating of teaching competencies increased from 30% to 44%. That was huge. Huge, huge, huge. So, statewide, 93.2% of third graders passed the 2018 MAAP assessment for promotion. And as you can see, in 15, only 85% passed. So we know that the level of supports we're providing is truly having an impact on our teachers. Our literacy support schools had a pass rate of 88.4% in 2018 and only 73% in 2015. So really getting in and being able to provide those coaching supports and having those teachers trained on letters, which we procured. We didn't pick. We wrote, this is the criteria that we want, that we need for our professional development system for our teachers. And so we procured it, but look at the difference it's made. And then this is what we're so proud of. And when the Alabama team, there was a big team from Alabama that came and visited with us in Mississippi. And I think probably this was one of the best things that we could say was that our average scale score on the NAEP in 4th grade reading increased significantly from 2013 to 2015 from 209 to 214. And it's continued to increase in 2017 to an average of 2015. And Mississippi is now 2nd in the nation for gains in 4th grade reading on NAEP. That's huge, y'all. And so when Denise said, we're saying thank God for Mississippi, when our Alabama friends came, they said, we can't say thank God for Mississippi anymore. But y'all, it's hard work. And we reach out to other states. Like I'm in consortiums with states all over the United States so that we can learn from them, so that we can glean parts of what's working for them and implement in our states. And we're not all the same. We don't all have the same dynamics. We don't all have the same supports. But if there's something we can take from another state that's working, you know, that's only an opportunity for our kids to grow. So, you know, you got to have supportive administrators. Y'all, what time am I supposed to stop right now?
11:30.
Okay. I'm about to stop. So, you got to have supportive administrators. I'm not going to go through that. That's just some stuff. We have EL guidelines we put in place, and I really wasn't going to go over that. I just wanted y'all to know that we attacked it from EL standpoint too. So if you download it, you'll see kind of some of the documents that we have. We also looked at educator prep and licensure requirements because that was huge. We partnered with people all over to make sure that we were all sending a common message. And Nick Moore said that today. You got to have a common vision. You got to have a common message. And so we did. So we had some strategic partners. We worked on resources, and you can see all of that. But what I really want to get to is my very end. Okay, so this is it. And then I'll be done. So what matters most? You have to refuse to surrender to poverty, bureaucracy, and funding shortfalls. You have to have well-executed routines. You have to work hard. You have to stay committed despite the challenges. You have to set big goals if you're going to improve effectiveness for your students. You have to have families as partners. You have to maintain your focus. You have to plan exhaustively. And remember, your challenges are real. Your roadblocks are numerous. Your resources are going to be required. Commitment is going to be crucial. Partnerships are essential. Obstacles are inevitable. You gotta fall. Through a conscious effort, our state has really made progress. We're making sure that the opportunities are there for kids. We're leveling the playing field. And we are pledging that all our kids will read to achieve success. So what does perseverance look like? There's my sweet brown-eyed man. So he made it. He made it. And if we put our kids at the forefront and we continue to focus on just those kids and persevere, all of our kids will be successful. So that's it.